The first transmission came through broken and confused. Wind howled across the ridgeline, rattling loose stone and dry brush, drowning half the words before they reached command. The patrol had taken cover behind a shallow berm, radios crackling with overlapping voices, adrenaline pushing sentences faster than thought. Someone yelled coordinates. Someone else swore. Then a sharper voice cut through the noise. Contact. Multiple hostiles. Shots fired. There was a pause, just long enough for disbelief to settle. Say again, command responded. Unconfirmed shooter. Another pause. Shorter this time. It's one person, the ranger said. Looks young. Static hissed. Wind surged. From a higher position along the ridge, a lone figure lay prone behind a fractured slab of rock. His movements were precise, economical. He adjusted his breathing the way he had been taught years earlier, slow and controlled, letting the chaos below pass through him without sticking. He did not rush. He did not hesitate. The rifle settled naturally into his shoulder. The scope framed the slope below with calm clarity. He waited until the target stepped into the open, then squeezed. One shot. Another figure dropped. Below, the patrol froze. Who the hell is that? Someone whispered into an open mic. The figure on the ridge shifted position, already moving before the echo faded. He was young by appearance, barely past the edge of boyhood if someone had passed him on the street. But the way he moved told a different story. Nothing wasted. Nothing panicked. Command came back on the line, sharper now. Rangers, identify the shooter. A voice answered, uncertain. Sir, he looks like a kid. There was a brief silence on the channel, the kind that carried judgment in it. From his position, the shooter heard none of it. His radio remained clipped to his vest, volume low, the chatter irrelevant. He focused on angles, wind, distance. The fundamentals did not change just because people were confused. Another hostile broke cover. He fired again. The figure fell. Below, someone swore softly. That's 3. Command's tone shifted. Confirm engagement authority. The young shooter finally keyed his radio. Engaging to protect friendly elements, he said calmly. His voice was steady, flat, professional, too professional. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe the channel and let me know in the comments where are you watching from. It helps more than you know. The radio went quiet for half a beat. Then command responded, slower this time. Shooter, state your unit. He didn't answer immediately. He adjusted his position again, sliding back from the ridge just enough to avoid drawing attention. Years of training had taught him when to speak and when silence carried more weight. Below, the Rangers regrouped, moving with new confidence now that the fire from above had shifted the balance. They advanced carefully, covering each other, trusting the unseen support they still didn't understand. The shooter watched them through the scope. He did not smile. He did not feel pride. He felt responsibility. Another movement caught his eye. Not hostile, too hesitant. Someone watching from cover, trying to decide whether to run or fight. The shooter waited. The figure bolted. He let him go. Command tried again. Shooter, identify yourself. This time he responded. Negative on unit disclosure, he said. You have what you need. Keep moving. A ranger muttered into the mic, forgetting discipline for a moment. That kid just saved our asses. The shooter exhaled slowly. They had no idea how far off they were. As the last hostile presence faded and the ridge grew quiet again, command pulled the Rangers back. Voices low, questions piling up faster than answers. Someone replayed the transmission logs. Someone else asked how a teenager could shoot like that under pressure. No one had an answer. From the ridge, the young man packed his rifle with the same care he had unpacked it. He checked his surroundings one final time, then disappeared into the terrain as if he had never been there at all. The radio crackled once more. Command to all units, a voice said. Stand by. We are escalating this. High above, already moving away, the shooter didn't slow. He had done his job, and the people questioning him were about to learn exactly who they had just heard on the radio. Command believed they were dealing with a reckless kid, but the voice on the ridge belonged to someone trained for moments exactly like this. Command didn't like uncertainty. The operations center hummed with restrained tension as the audio logs replayed again and again. Voices overlapped. Wind distorted edges of sentences, but one thing came through clean every time. The shooter's voice. Calm, controlled, unemotional. "That doesn't sound like panic," one officer said quietly. "It doesn't sound like a kid either," another replied. On a screen near the front of the room, a paused frame showed a grainy thermal outline from a distant drone sweep. A single heat signature high on the ridge. Too steady, too deliberate. "Pull satellite history," someone ordered. "Last 48 hours." The footage rolled. The figure had been there before the patrol even made contact. Different position. Same ridge. Same measured movements. No wasted steps. "That's pre-positioning," a senior analyst said. He wasn't reacting. He was waiting. Questions began stacking up. Who had authorized Overwatch? Why wasn't it logged? And why did no one recognize the voice? Out in the field, the Rangers regrouped at a rally point, adrenaline giving way to confusion. Helmets came off. Someone passed a canteen around. A few looked back toward the ridge where the shots had come from. "I've been shot at by professionals," one Ranger said. "That felt like one." Another shook his head. "No way, that was some civilian kid." Their team leader keyed the radio again. "Command, request clarification on unknown shooter." Static answered first, then carefully. "Stand by." The delay stretched. Back in the operations center, a different file had been pulled. Thin, restricted, marked with layers of authorization most of the room didn't have. A name appeared, then disappeared behind redaction bars. "That's not possible," someone said. "Check the age," another insisted. The number came back. "Too young." "Run it again." Same result. Silence followed. Not confusion this time. Recognition. "That program was shut down," an officer said. "Unofficially. Not shut down," someone else corrected. Buried. In the hills, the young shooter had already moved on. He traveled light, avoiding trails, keeping low where the terrain allowed. His breathing never quickened. His pace never faltered. He replayed the engagement once clinically. Wind, distance, angles. No mistakes, no excess. The Rangers would be fine now. That was enough. He paused briefly near a dry outcrop, adjusted the strap on his pack, and checked his radio. Still quiet. That meant command was arguing instead of acting. Expected. Back at base, the room finally stirred. "Get me regional," a commander said. "Now," another voice cut in. "Sir, with respect, if this is who I think it is, regional won't touch it." The commander stared. "Then who does?" The answer came reluctantly. "Higher." A secure line was requested. Then another. Phones that rarely rang began to ring. On the ridge, far from the arguments, the shooter reached a marked point and waited. Not because he was told to, but because this was where the next phase always began. His radio clicked once. "Hold position," a new voice said. Older, heavier with authority. The shooter responded immediately. "Holding." No questions. No commentary. In the operations center, someone finally voiced what everyone else was thinking. Why would someone like that be operating alone? No one answered. Because the truth sat uncomfortably between policy and reality. The shooter hadn't been deployed to support the Rangers. He had been deployed to watch everything else. Minutes later, confirmation arrived. Quiet, verbal, unrecorded. The commander exhaled slowly. "All units," he said into the open channel. "Unknown shooter is no longer unknown. You are not to pursue. You are not to question. You are to follow instructions exactly as given." One Ranger frowned. "Sir." Who was he? The pause on the line stretched longer than before. "Someone you don't need to worry about," command replied, "and someone you should be glad was there." High above, the shooter listened to the exchange with mild detachment. He had heard versions of it before. Different places, same disbelief. He checked his surroundings once more. Soon they would want to meet him. They always did. As command finally uncovered who had been firing from the ridge, one question remained unanswered. Why someone like him had been sent there in the first place. They met him at dawn, not on the ridge, and not at the rally point where the Rangers waited with unanswered questions. The location was quieter than that. A temporary forward site tucked into terrain that didn't appear on standard maps. 2 vehicles arrived first. No markings, no flags. The young shooter was already there. He stood beside a rock outcrop, pack set neatly at his feet, rifle secured but not displayed. His posture was relaxed but deliberate, the kind of stillness that came from confidence, not caution. The senior officer stepped out slowly. Up close, the age discrepancy was impossible to ignore. The shooter looked barely old enough to be out of training, let alone operating alone in contested terrain. His face was calm, unreadable, eyes clear and attentive. "Good morning," the officer said. "Morning," the shooter replied. No rank was exchanged. The officer studied him for a long moment. "You understand why this situation raised concerns?" "Yes," the shooter said evenly. "You engaged without visible authorization. I engaged to protect friendly elements. That's not the concern." The shooter waited. He had learned early that silence invited clarity. The officer exhaled. "You weren't supposed to be here." The shooter tilted his head slightly. "I was exactly where I was told to be." A folder was produced, thin, heavily restricted. It was opened, then quickly closed again, as if even looking at it too long carried risk. "That program ended years ago," the officer said. "At least, that's what most of us were told." "It changed," the shooter replied. "It didn't end." The officer's jaw tightened. "You're young." The shooter didn't react. He had heard that word his entire career. Instructors used it as a warning. Command used it as doubt. Enemies used it as their last mistake. "Age doesn't affect the fundamentals," he said. Behind the officer, another man spoke for the first time. "How many operations?" The shooter answered without hesitation. "Enough." That was all he offered. They didn't push. The hesitation in the room wasn't about authority anymore. It was about realizing how much they hadn't been told. In the operations center, the file was being discussed again, this time behind locked doors. Analysts spoke carefully. Language softened. The confidence from the night before had been replaced with caution. "Why wasn't this disclosed to us?" someone asked. "Because it didn't need to be," came the reply. The implications settled in slowly. The shooter hadn't been deployed to assist the Rangers. He hadn't even been deployed for the engagement. He had been watching something else entirely. Back at the forward site, the officer closed the folder for good. "You'll be debriefed," he said. "Privately." "Yes, sir," the shooter replied. "And then?" "I'll continue my assignment." The officer nodded once. "You saved lives." "That wasn't the objective," the shooter said calmly. The officer paused. "Then what was?" The shooter met his gaze. "Observation." That answer changed the tone of the room. The Rangers never saw him again. They were briefed instead. Carefully worded statements, firm instructions, no room for speculation. The story that circulated later was clean and incomplete. Aerial support, unknown overwatch, quick reaction, nothing about a teenager on a ridge. Days later, in a secure facility far from the field, the shooter sat alone at a table identical to dozens he'd sat at before. Screens displayed timelines, audio logs, movement overlays. A voice spoke from behind the glass. "You broke cover." "Yes." "Was it necessary?" The shooter considered the question. "If I hadn't, friendly casualties were likely." A pause. "Then it was acceptable." The shooter nodded. Another voice joined in. "Command wants to know if this changes anything." "It doesn't," the shooter said. They saw what they were meant to see. The lights dimmed slightly as the session ended. Later that night, alone in a room that offered no comforts, the shooter sat on the edge of the bed and stared at his hands. For a brief moment, something like weight pressed against his chest. Not fear, not doubt, just the quiet accumulation of years spent proving himself to people who only ever saw his age. He let the feeling exist. Then he let it pass. Because tomorrow the assignment would continue. And the people who now knew he existed were about to learn why that file had never been meant to surface. Command believed the mystery ended when they found him, but uncovering who he was only exposed a deeper question they weren't ready to ask. The shift happened quietly. No announcement, no briefing that said things had changed. Just a subtle tightening of language and secure channels and a sudden interest in movements that had previously gone unremarked. The shooter noticed it immediately. He was repositioned within hours, not closer to the Rangers, not farther from the contact zone, sideways, into a sector that didn't make sense unless someone was finally paying attention to the larger picture. He accepted the coordinates without comment. From his new position, the terrain told a different story. Supply routes that didn't align with known patterns. Radio traffic that followed rhythms too deliberate to be accidental. Movements that avoided engagement while still shaping it. This wasn't a scattered enemy, this was structure. Back at command, the tone had changed. The voices on the secure line were fewer now, but heavier. Titles replaced first names. Sentences were shorter. Nobody speculated anymore. What he observed yesterday wasn't the anomaly, one analyst said. It was the proof. Maps were redrawn. Old assumptions were quietly discarded. The Ranger Patrol had been bait, not deliberately but effectively, and the shooter had been the only one positioned to see it. In the field, he watched through optics as a convoy paused in an area that shouldn't have mattered. Vehicles didn't unload. They waited, timed something, then moved on without incident. He marked it. An hour later, another group mirrored the behavior several kilometers away. Pattern confirmed. He keyed his radio once. Movement aligns with secondary network. The response came immediately this time. Copy, continue observation. No questions, no doubt. That alone told him how much had changed. At a higher level, the file that wasn't supposed to exist was now open on a different table. Not debated. Used. Why him? A senior official asked. Because he's already invisible, came the answer. And because he sees things others dismiss. The official frowned. He's young. Exactly. The word no longer carried skepticism. It carried advantage. The shooter relocated again before dusk, keeping the sun at his back, adjusting for wind. He logged everything. Distances, delays, behavioral tells. He did not engage. Not once. This wasn't about stopping anything yet. It was about understanding it. That night, command transmitted new instructions. Careful ones. You are cleared to remain independent, the voice said. You will not attach to any unit. You will not be acknowledged in reports. Understood, he replied. You may be asked to confirm targets later. He paused for half a second. When necessary. That was enough. In the operations center, someone finally voiced the concern that had been forming all day. If he's right, then we've been reacting to symptoms. The room went quiet, which means, another said slowly, we haven't even identified the disease. The implications spread outward, touching programs, partnerships, assumptions that had gone unchallenged for years. And somewhere in that chain of realization, the young shooter stopped being an anomaly. He became an asset. On the ridge, under a sky gone dark and clear, he lay still and listened, not just to radio traffic, but to silence, to what wasn't being said, to what was deliberately hidden. This was the part of the work that never made sense to people who wanted action, patience. Hours later, confirmation came through in fragments, intercepts aligned, movements synchronized. A network revealed itself through restraint, not aggression. He transmitted one final message before powering down his radio. Confirmed, he said. This wasn't a random engagement. Command responded after a pause. We see it now. He closed his eyes briefly. They always did, eventually. But seeing something was not the same as stopping it. And the decisions they were about to make would test whether they were ready to act on what he had uncovered. The shooter had never been sent to win a firefight. He had been sent to expose a system, and now that system was fully in view. The first order didn't come. That was how the shooter knew things had reached a tipping point. For hours, command monitored the network he had uncovered without issuing a single directive. No repositioning, no interdiction, just listening, watching, confirming what they had been reluctant to believe. This wasn't a rogue cell. It was coordination. Supply routes intersected with communications relays. Movements coincided with diplomatic windows. Certain engagements were avoided not out of fear but because they didn't serve the broader design. The shooter transmitted updates at scheduled intervals. Short, precise, no interpretation layered on top. Movement delayed by 12 minutes. Secondary channel active, pattern unchanged. Each transmission tightened the picture. Back at the operations center, the atmosphere had shifted again. The earlier disbelief was gone. So was the cautious curiosity. What replaced it was something heavier, responsibility. If we act now, we expose the network, one officer said. But we also expose how long we missed it. Another voice answered quietly. If we don't act, we admit we're willing to let it continue. That silence lasted longer. The shooter didn't hear any of this. He was already moving to his next observation point, adjusting his route to avoid detection, maintaining the invisibility that had made him useful in the first place. He thought briefly of the Rangers. They had done nothing wrong. They had followed procedure. They had trusted the systems in place. That trust was why he had been there. By nightfall, the order finally came, but not to him. It went to another unit, one that would never know his name, one that would believe the intelligence had arrived cleanly from satellites and analysis rather than a lone figure on a ridge. That was intentional. The shooter was told only one thing: remain in position, do not engage unless directly threatened. Understood? The strike unfolded miles away, quiet, precise. No explosions broadcast across the sky, no footage for later review, just absence. When dawn came, the traffic he had been tracking didn't resume. No staggered movements, no pauses in odd places, no silent acknowledgments on secondary channels. The network had gone dark. He waited anyway. Experience had taught him that disappearance could mean adaptation. He observed until the pattern confirmed what command already suspected. The structure was gone. Back at base, a briefing was held with language. Stripped of unnecessary detail, success was noted, risks acknowledged, lessons carefully worded. No mention was made of the shooter. That omission was not accidental. Later that day, a message arrived for him alone. "You're clear to extract." He acknowledged it, then took a moment longer than required to scan the terrain one last time. The ridge looked ordinary now, unimportant, a place no one would ever mark. That was as it should be. As he moved toward the extraction point, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Not pride, not regret, completion. The job he had been given, quietly, indirectly, was done. But as the vehicle doors closed and the landscape slipped away behind him, he knew this wasn't the end of the story. Not for command, not for the systems he had exposed. They had acted once. The harder question was whether they would remember what it had taken to see the truth in the first place. The network was gone, the mission complete. But the silence it left behind forced command to confront what they had ignored for far too long. The debrief took place far from the field. No windows, no insignia on the walls. Just a table, a chair, and a screen that displayed a timeline already stripped of identifying details. The shooter sat alone, posture relaxed but attentive, hands folded, expression neutral. A voice spoke from behind the glass. "The operation is considered resolved." He nodded once. "The network has collapsed. Secondary channels are inactive. No resurgence detected." "Understood." There was a pause. Not procedural this time, reflective. "You were never meant to be part of the record," the voice continued. "You understand that?" "Yes." "Some will never know you were there." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The screen went dark. Later that evening, he stood outside the facility as the sun dropped behind low hills, casting long shadows across the pavement. He wore civilian clothes now. No rifle, no radio, no visible trace of what he had done or where he had been. That was intentional. The Rangers had already returned to rotation. Their reports were clean. Their version of events made sense without him. They would tell the story differently over time. About timing, about luck, about unseen support that arrived when it mattered most. They would never mention a young shooter on a ridge, and that was fine. Inside the system, changes were already happening, quiet ones, programs reviewed, assumptions challenged, language adjusted to reflect what had been learned without admitting how long it had been missed. Some leaders took the lesson seriously, others would forget. He knew that too. The shooter walked to the edge of the lot and stopped for a moment, feeling the weight of the day settle, not as exhaustion but as clarity. He had been underestimated because of his age, dismissed because he didn't fit expectations. That had been the advantage. He had not needed recognition to do the work. He had not needed belief to carry responsibility. He had only needed to be where he was told and to see what others overlooked. The phone in his pocket vibrated once. A short message. No signature. "Stand by." He read it, then slipped the phone away. Somewhere else, another situation was forming. Another pattern hiding in plain sight. Another place where assumptions would fail and someone quiet would be needed to see clearly. He would go when called. Until then, he remained what he had always been, unremarkable by design, effective by necessity. And if you've been listening this far, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know.